Hello everyone, this is my second video on this topic on low rarity cards that are interesting and might be playable. If you haven't seen the first one, check it out on my channel. The most powerful and best cards are all in the first video. But I made another one because I found some more interesting low rarity cards and because I missed some in the first one. One of the best cards I missed in the first video is Planet Pathfinder. You can tribute this card, add one field spell from your deck to your hand. An important Sorcerer to get your field spell in many decks. And it's only rare, and I think Terraforming is a higher rarity. Terraforming is ultra rare and limited. This is unlimited and rare. Battle Fader is a classic card, played in burn and stall decks. Opponent's monster class attack special, summon this card from your hand and end the battle phase. Nowadays it can also be used as link material afterwards. A card that was hyped back in the day was Card D. It's too slow for most decks nowadays, but for slow decks, stall decks and such, or back row heavy decks, this is still an interesting card. During your main phase 1, you can tribute this card, draw 2 cards, then it becomes the end phase. So immediately +1, draw 2 is always a nice effect. Card that was on the ban list for must have been over a decade. It was on the ban list, I think one of the cards that was on the ban list for the longest time and then got unbanned. It's Chaos Emperor Dragon Envoy of the End. Special summoned by banish 1 light and 1 dark from your graveyard. And best part about is you can finish games with this because it deals so much damage. You can attack and then after attacking once per turn you can pay 1000 life points, send as many cards in both players' hands and on the field as possible to the graveyard. So basically it sends all cards. It doesn't destroy, that's another upside. It does not destroy, it sends them in both players' hands and on the field as possible to the graveyard. Basically everything other than itself gets sent to the grave, then inflicts 300 damage to your opponent for each card sent to the opponent's graveyard by this effect. Cannot activate other cards or effects during the turn you activate this card's effect. Another great card if you play light and dark in your deck. Chaos Sorcerer. They saw a lot of play, one of the most played cards for a long time. This too is special summoned by banishing 1 light and 1 dark monster from your graveyard. And once per turn you can target 1 face-up monster on the field, banish that target. Banishing is great, as I am sure you know. This card cannot attack the turn you activate this effect. If you play about an equal amount of light and dark monsters in a deck, this is basically a must, a staple to play. What else? The other monsters on this list are more of, how do I say it, situational cards that don't fit in every deck. So with a special purpose, for example Consecrated Light. This is basically useless except against dark monsters. With the classic side deck card. But if you just want to annoy someone who plays dark monsters or just want to annoy decks that play dark monsters, this is a great one. Neither player can normal or special summon dark monsters or declare an attack with dark monsters. This card cannot be destroyed by battle with a dark monster, also you take no battle damage from that battle. So this card can shut down decks that only play dark monsters. Otherwise it's useless, but against dark monsters it's OP. Then the 3 heralds, the 3 small ones, effect monster heralds, are hand traps. One for each card type. When your opponent activates a monster effect, you can send this and one other fairy monster from your hand to the graveyard, negate the activation if you do destroy it. This is the same with spells and this with traps. So this only works if you have fairies, other fairies in your hand to discard. Nice hand traps if you play fairies. Fortune Lady Wind is a card that also can be played outside of Fortune Lady because of its effect. It's similar to Breaker the Magical Warrior, because when this card is normal summoned you can destroy spells traps your opponent controls equal to the number of Fortune Lady monsters you control. So even if this is the only Fortune Lady you play, you can still destroy one spell or trap card when it is normal summoned. Retaliating Sea, of course not nearly as strong as Max Sea, but still an interesting card. During either player's turn, it's also hand trapped, during either player's turn when your opponent activates a spell card, so it has to be a spell card that includes an effect that special summons a monster, you can special summon this card from your hand. If summoned this way while this card is face up on the field, any card sent to the graveyard is banished instead. If this card is sent from the field to the graveyard, you can add one Earth Insect type monster with 1500 or less attack from your deck to your hand, except Retaliating Sea. So if your opponent activates a spell that includes an effect that special summons it, this will banish anything from the field as long as it stays, and if it gets destroyed, even if you don't play insects, you can add, for example, Max Sea to your hand with its effect. The other cards on this list, the other monsters at least, are more gimmicks. Or very situational. For example, Goddess of Sweet Revenge. While you control no cards, and this is the only card in your hand, so this only works if you have absolutely no cards in the field or in the hand except for this. When an opponent's monster declares an attack, you can discard this card, destroy as many cards as possible your opponent controls, then you can special summon one monster from your deck. So very powerful effect, but you might never be able to actually use it. But in certain decks it might actually work. A target that might work well with this effect, or just in general in decks where you run out of cards, is Elemental Hero Bubbleman. If this is the only card in your hand, you can special summon it from your hand. That in itself is a useful effect, for example for Exceeds. And an additional effect, if you control no other cards, have no cards on your hand, when this card is summoned you can draw 2 cards. So if this is the only card, same as this, only card on the field or in hand, you have no other cards on the field or hand, you can draw 2 cards. So those two are interesting in decks that run out of cards or play from the grave. Another interesting effect, Tour Latin. If it is your opponent's battle phase and all monsters you controlled at the start of this battle phase, the drawback is it has to be at least two. A minimum of 2 monsters. If you control a minimum of 2 monsters at the start of this battle phase, and both have been destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, you can special summon this card from your hand. If summoned this way, choose an attribute and destroy all face-up monsters with that attribute. And the best part, your opponent cannot normal summon or special summon monsters with that attribute. So if you manage to have 2 monsters at the start of the opponent's battle phase, and your opponent has a deck that only plays 1 attribute, this has the potential to shut them down. That's why it's interesting. Then also focused on attributes, but not on the opponents, but on your own, are the Elemental Lords, and 2 of the Elemental Lords are rare or normal rarity. Pyrorex, the Fire Elemental Lord, and Windrose, the Wind Elemental Lord, are low rarity. Both of them need exactly 5 monsters of their attribute in your graveyard to special summon them. The fire one, you can target and destroy 1 monster your opponent controls. Both players take damage equal to the original attack. And the wind one, if this card is special summoned, destroy all spells and traps your opponent controls. Yugioh. Another interesting card. During the battle step, quick effect. You can special summon this card from your hand, and if you do gain 1000 life points, you can only activate this effect of Yugioh once per turn. Quick effect. So you can activate this immediately after you special summon it during the battle step. You can tribute this card, then target 1 face-up monster you control. It gains 1000 attack until the end of the next turn. So it's kind of similar to hand traps like Honest or Kalut, except you don't have to use it like that. You can use it for the attack boost during the battle step, but you can also just leave it on the field to attack itself. Then I found some interesting column focused or placement focused cards, but let's see if I have any other. I want to do those together. Let's do those 2 first. 2 big monsters that special summon themselves from your hand if your opponent attacks. Snowplow, Hustle, Rustle. When your opponent's monster declares a direct attack while you control a card in a spell and trap zone, you can special summon this card from your hand, then destroy as many cards in your spell and trap zone as possible, and if you do, inflict 200 damage to your opponent for each destroyed card. You cannot special summon any monsters except for machine monsters. First of all, it's a nice defense. Opponent declares direct attack, you get to special summon a monster with 3000 defense. And this effect is interesting for burn decks, 200 damage for each destroyed card. Or if you have any spells and traps that activate their effect if they get destroyed and sent to the grave. This would be an interesting combo. Also, if you can exceed summon level 10 machine monsters. But mainly for those effects to just stop the attacks if they have less than 3000 attack, your opponent's monsters, and the burn damage. Similar card is Guardian Slime. If you take battle or effect damage, either, you can special summon this card from your hand. During damage calculation, if this card battles an opponent's monster, you can make this card gain defense equal to that monster's attack during that damage calculation only. So basically, as long as in defense position and doesn't have its effect negated, it can't be destroyed by battle, no matter how much attack your opponent has. If this card is sent from the hand or field to the graveyard, the second effect won't be used if you don't play it in its specific deck. You can add one spell trap from the deck to your hand that specifically lists the card Winged Dragon of Ra in its text, only once per turn. So this will only be used in Egyptian God decks, but even without this effect it is still a powerful defensive card to stop your opponent's attacks. Also can be used for Exceed Summon, level 10 Exceed Summon. Let's do all the column cards together and do the other cards first. Soul Exchange is only rarity. Great way to get rid of opponent's monsters that are otherwise impossible to get rid of or very difficult to get rid of. Target one monster your opponent controls. This turn, if you tribute a monster, you must have a tribute monster in your hand. You must tribute that target, so your opponent's monster, as if you controlled it. You cannot conduct your battle phase the turn you activate this card. Still, you can get rid of some monsters you can't get rid of otherwise, as long as you play tribute monsters. Advanced Draw. Good card for drawing cards. If you play level 8 or higher monsters, tribute one face-up level 8 or higher monster you control, draw 2 cards. For example, this might work well combined with those 2 cards I just showed you, Snowplow, Hustle Rustle and Guardian Slime. Special summon them if your opponent attacks you and they prevent you from taking battle damage. And if you can't use them or don't need them anymore, you can turn them into drawing 2 cards with this one. Blizzard, a quick play spell. Target one face-up spell your opponent controls. This turn negate the activated effects of that spell and all spells on the field with that same original name. If the targeted card would be sent to the opponent's graveyard this turn, it is added to your hand. No, it is added to their hand instead. You can only activate one Blizzard per turn. This might be interesting as against some specific decks. Not sure what the best use is, but an interesting card for sure. Then 2 spells that work only against one type or one attribute of monster. So if you are playing against machine type decks, if you want to defeat a machine deck, specifically System Down is a great anti-machine card. Pay 1000 life points, banish all machine type monsters from your opponent controls and in their graveyard. All they control and in their graveyard get banished. That's great against machines. and against an attribute, against wind attribute only, poisonous winds, continue spell. Wind monsters cannot be special summoned. I think all of the Lurlusk are wind. Not sure about the Exceed, I'm just looking it up. Yes, all the Exceed are wind. So if you want to annoy some Lurlusk players, this might be an interesting card. They can't special summon any wind monsters. Now to the trap cards. Secret Barrel is a very old card and played in every burn deck. Inflict 200 damage to your opponent for each card in their hand and for each card they control. Just a powerful burn card. Pointer of Red Lotus. Can be annoying, can stop some plays. Pay 2000 life points and reveal your entire hand. Look at your opponent's hand and banish one card from their hand until your opponent's next end phase. So you can disrupt your opponent's strategy with this. One of the best cards on this list in my opinion. If you are broke, if you are out of gems and out of crafting materials and need a trap, I recommend considering this one. Witch Strike. It's a normal trap, not a counter trap, that's a drawback. If your opponent negates the normal or special summon of a monster or the activation of a card or effect. So maybe I am missing something, but it sounds like if they negate anything basically, or the activation of a card or effect. You can activate this card, destroy all cards your opponent controls and in their hand. This sounds OP, but the issue is the card is relatively slow and situational. It only works in this situation if they negate anything, and otherwise it might be a dead card. That's why it doesn't see more play. That's why no one plays it. But if you don't have all the ultra rare and super rare cards, this is definitely worth a look in my opinion. Because if you can activate this card, this is extremely powerful. Destroy all cards they control and in their hand. So definitely take a look at this one if you want a normal rarity trap card. A negation card, but this is a counter trap and worse in my opinion regardless. First of all, it has to be the only set card, so face-up cards are fine, but the only set card in a spell and trap zone. When a monster would be summoned or a spell, trap card or monster effect is activated. So very versatile, easy to activate, but the drawback is, aside from it having to be the only set one, pay 3000 life points. So often you either won't even be able to pay 3000 or you negate something and will still die afterwards. Negate the summon or activation, and if you do destroy that card. So the effect is great, a great negation that can negate pretty much everything, but the 3000 life points is a bigger drawback than it sounds. This is played in banishing decks, in Grand Mayu decks, but it's worth a look to play in other decks too. Banish any number, oh I forgot the name, Banquet of Millions. Banish any number of cards from your extra deck face down So you can use it to banish 15 cards, your whole extra deck, and banish the same number of random face down cards from your opponent's extra deck face up until the end phase. You can only activate one Banquet of Millions per turn. So if you activate this card during your opponent's turn, they can't summon anything from their extra deck. They can't summon any extra deck monsters at all. That's why this is definitely worth a look. An interesting card. Your opponent not being able to summon anything from the extra deck is extremely powerful against many decks. Another burn damage card. This one is great combined with Kaijus. Soma the Spirit. It's a trap monster. Special summon this card in defense position as an effect monster. That's the drawback, defense position, so it's rather slow. But since it's a trap monster, I guess it doesn't make much of a difference. This card is also still a trap. If this card summoned this way is destroyed by battle, inflict damage to your opponent equal to the attack of the monster that destroyed it. So you set this trap card, and then during your next turn you could, for example, summon a Kaiju to your opponent's side of the field, tribute an opponent's monster and summon a powerful Kaiju in attack position, for example the one with 3300. Oh, of course, before that, during your opponent's turn. During your opponent's turn, for example your opponent's end phase, you special summon this in defense position. It has speed during your opponent's turn, so you can switch the battle position during your own turn. So during your opponent's turn, end phase, whatever, you special summon this in defense, and during your turn you switch it to attack position and attack into a powerful monster your opponent has with a lot of attack. Either your opponent just has a monster with a lot of attack, or you tribute one of their monsters for a Kaiju. And then this dies by battle and you inflict damage to your opponent equal to the attack of the monster that destroyed it. So for example, if they control a blue eyes, you can deal 3000 effect damage to them. If you summon the 3/3 attack Kaiju, you can deal 3300, difficult word, to your opponent. So you can deal a ton of damage with this great burn card. Maybe I should add this to my Time Lord deck. I think I'm going to play one copy in my Time Lord deck. Next, a cheap alternative to Call of the Haunted. Limit reverse. Target one monster with 1000 or less attack in your graveyard. Special summon it in attack position. If the target is changed to defense position, destroy it and discard. This effect is very interesting in some decks, for example Venominaga decks, because this effect can trigger the trap that summons Venominaga, and otherwise it's just used to summon anything with 1000 or less attack from your grave. For example, Time Lords. When this card leaves the field, destroy the target. When this target is destroyed, destroy this card, same as Call of the Haunted. Another card I play in Time Lords is Dimension Gate. This is basically a slower trap alternative to Forbidden Lands. Activate this card by targeting one monster you control, banish that target face up. So if your opponent targets your monster with something that would get rid of your monster, you can instead banish your monster. And there is a way to get it back again. When an opponent's monster declares a direct attack, you can send this face-up card on the field to the graveyard. If this card is sent to the graveyard, so it works too if it gets destroyed by the opponent, it doesn't have to be by this effect. you can special summon the monster banished by this card's effect. So basically, if your opponent would get rid of your monster, you can banish it instead. And if they attack you directly, or if they destroy this card, you get your monster back. I play this in my Time Lord deck. Another revival card. Call of the Haunted alternative. When this card is activated, forgot the name, World Legacy Secret. When this card is activated, you can target one level 5 or higher monster in your graveyard, special summon it. When this card leaves the field, destroy that monster. Negate any opponent's monster effect that activates in the same column as a Mekk-Knight monster you control. So the second part will only work with Mekk-Knights, but the first one is basically a Call of the Haunted. A Call of the Haunted for level 5 or higher monsters. And it seems to stay on the field, even if the monster gets destroyed. Wait a second, did my stream just crash? I hope not. I think... oh, that's another one. Stygian Dirge. Very situational card, was great when everyone during the Exceed era, when all decks only played Exceed. But it might still annoy some decks. Usually it might be useless, but if you know you are going to play against someone who only plays Exceed or very Exceed focused deck, this might be interesting. Permanent continuous trap. Reduce the levels of all monsters your opponent controls by 1. So they can't summon their Exceed anymore. Synchro players might also be annoyed, but to a less extent. I think the only cards left now are cards revolving and focused around columns on the field and card placement. I found some interesting ones centered around this theme. Ghostbird of Bewitchment. This card gains an effect based on your main monster zone it is in. If it's in your leftmost zone, it gains 1000 attack and defense. That makes it a level 4 normal summon monster with 2300 attack and 2500 defense. So a nice beat stick. But you can also use 2 other effects. If it's in the rightmost zone instead, can make up to 2 attacks on monsters during each battle phase. So it has its original stats but can make 2 attacks on monsters. If it's in the center zone, your opponent cannot target this card with card effects. Also, it cannot be destroyed by your opponent's card effects. This is interesting if you, for example, if you use an equip spell on it, or some other reason you want to keep this on the field. Immune to card effects, basically if it's in the center zone. And if it's in another zone, any other zone, monsters in this column cannot activate their effects. This is great too, for example, if your opponent has a quick effect that can negate stuff during your turn, you can summon this in the same column as that monster and then they can't activate their effect. So a very versatile card with some nice effects. Might be playable in many different decks. interesting tech card. Another card focused around columns. Iron Dragon Tiamaton. Cannot be normal summon set. Must be special summoned by the following effect. If 3 or more cards are in the same column, it shouldn't be too difficult. Most players on Master Duels play their monsters and spells traps in the same columns. They don't spread it out usually, most players at least. So if your opponent has a monster and a spell trap in the same column, and you can set a spell trap in the same column, you can special summon this card. Quick effect, you can special summon this card from your hand. You can only use this once per turn. If this card is special summoned, destroy all other cards in this card's column. So you can destroy a monster and a spell trap of your opponent and your own spell or trap. So it works best if your spell or trap has any effects that activate if it gets destroyed. But even if not, you can still get to destroy one spell trap and one monster your opponent controls. Neither player can use the unused zone in this card's column. So an interesting destruction effect. Another one around this theme. Fantastic Stryborg. Monsters tributed for their face-up tribute summon of this card are returned to the hand instead of going to the graveyard. Once per turn you can discard one card. Return all cards your opponent controls in this card's column to the hand. So another very interesting effect to return, mostly for returning a powerful monster your opponent controls to their hand. Or another interesting use for this card, if your opponent has, for example, what's it called? Royal Oppression? No, Royal Oppression is the one that negates special summons. What's the one that negates spells? How did I forget this? Was it not Royal? How did I forget what this card was called? One second. Excuse my brain. How did I forget what this card was called? can't find it. How am I not finding this card? Master Duel's Eldritch deck. I found it. Wait a second. Imperial, not royal. Imperial, that's why. Of course. That's why I didn't find it. I knew it was something with royalty. But it's not royal, it's the Imperial Order. So that's what I wanted to say. This card could be used, for example, to get rid of Imperial Order. If you summon this card on card, you just have to summon it in the same column as Imperial Order, for example, and then you can return Imperial Order to your opponent's hand with this. So this is a great way around Imperial Order. I think those were all the monsters with interesting column effects. There also is a spell, a field spell, defense zone. For each monster a player controls in the main monster zone, their spells, traps in the same column as that monster cannot be destroyed by their opponent's card effects, and their opponent cannot target them with card effects. So if you play a deck centered around an important continuous spell or trap, you should probably play this card. Interesting for those decks. And last but not least, some traps with column effects. Broken Line, a counter trap. When a spell, trap card or monster effect is activated in this card's column while this card is set, negate the activation, and if you do, destroy that card. So a great counter trap card that can negate anything in the same column. And this is the last card, I think. Blasting Fuse, normal trap. Activate only when all zones of this card's column are occupied. Destroy all cards in this column. So it destroys your own monster in the column, but it also destroys one spell trap and one monster of your opponent. So another interesting column themed card. Those were all the 40 cards I found, all low rarity, rare or normal rarity. And as I said at the start of the video, I have another one with even better ones, with 70. Most of them are better and less situational than the ones in this video, so check out the other video. And let me know in the comments if you find any more interesting rare or normal cards that can be played outside of their own archetype. Bye!